Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you guys are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining our show today about the digital ecosystem, one and the first of our 6 episodes season, so to speak. Today, so my name is Wolfgang Söldner. I'm the head of global education at i3 Technologies. And today, the first thing I'd really love you guys to do is just to let us know in the chats where you're from and what your role is, either in industry or in a school, just so we get a little bit of a feeling who we are actually talking to. And thanks again. Right at the end of today, we'd really love to also get some questions from you that we'll be answering with our panelists. So I think that's always a really good engagement piece. When I join these kind of events, I love to be able to get some questions answered so that I've got real meaningful takeaways that are applicable to my situation. So first of all, let me just address a little bit the maybe the elephant in the room as to why is this even worth your while, and explain to you a little bit about, since me joining i3, what it means for me as an educator. I've literally just come out of 17 years of education in international schools and joined i3 in May. So the goal since my joining really has been looking at the whole solution that we offer. So we're not really focused as much on individual products as much as looking at schools, their context, and what it is that they need and where they're at in their learning journey and digitalization story, really. Beyond that, we really are interested in becoming trusted partners in the learning and teaching scene. And so this is really our first attempt to try and offer something that is helpful to the audience and to educators around the world. We really want to be sharing best practice, which is what we're going to start with today with our 2 lovely guests. And to be honest, also by bringing in these experts with us, we're going to offer you some insights into education that maybe hasn't been thought of or that isn't as obvious. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you, which hopefully you already know, our 2 panelists for today, which is Philippa and Mark. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi.
Look at that.
Hi there.
Hi. Brilliant. And also, really quickly, just to butt in again, it's so lovely to actually be connected like this. Philip is in Dubai, Mark's in Bristol, and I'm in the south of France. So, it's fantastic to also just be connected worldwide, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The magic of technology.
Exactly.
And it's lovely, Wolfgang and Philippa. I don't know if you can see, but in the chat, we've got people from America, Belgium, Denmark, Morocco, Brussels, Catalonia, University of Catalonia, and coming from all over the world. So how lovely to have such an international flavour, both on the panel, but also from those joining us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Really, really good. All right, why don't we just start? Mark, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get going on this discussion.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief because I've done a few things in my career, so we could be here a little while. But basically, teacher for more than 2 decades with teaching of responsibilities, middle leader, senior leader responsibilities. I've had responsibility in post for deploying technology and having quite large rollouts of technology, particularly iPad. Did one of the world's first of those back in sort of tail end of 2011, so say quite early in the life of iPads. Far more schools use them nowadays than they did back then. I work since then, since I left education. I started my own business in 2015 as ICT evangelist, working to help schools around effective use of technology and digital strategy, all these kind of things. My sort of follower numbers have grown over the years as well. So with that, edtech companies have wanted to get in touch. And one of the lovely things I get to do with my work is work with the likes of yourself, Wolfgang, and other companies where I can get to help have conversations about teaching and learning and really have an impact on firms and companies' approaches to working with schools and the technology that develops. So really privileged. And I currently hold a part-time role as well as head of education at a company called Net Support, which serves more than 18 million different devices. So far more students than devices being used, but 18 million different devices across the world every single day. So again, great opportunity to have an impact in education beyond the work I do with schools directly.
So only a few things that you do then? Doesn't sound like you're busy at all, Mark. And Philippa, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I mean, I have to now follow that. I've not been in the industry for as long as Mark, although I think I have been privileged enough to be part of the edtech industry for probably a time period where it has really been phenomenally pushed in terms of the way that it's being utilized in schools. So I've been in education for just over 12 years now. I originally started as a design technology teacher with a passion to teach fashion, and design and technology was just a huge kind of driver for me about getting people and students to understand the importance of design and design in every aspect of life. And actually, that's an incredibly a big part of why I actually really enjoy teaching and talking about education technology, because to me, it's all about the design. It's about the concept of how it fits in. So I taught in the UK for 7 years, and then I moved over to the UAE, and I've been in Abu Dhabi now for 5 years. And I was the Director of Digital Education at Repton School in Abu Dhabi, which is an Apple Distinguished School. I wrote their book for them to become redistinguished as an Apple Distinguished School as they moved through into a senior school. And then I moved over and did a conversion for Cranley School in Abu Dhabi as well, where it was much more about changing mindsets and basically putting the community first and seeing what was needed there, and being able to push and drive educational pedagogy through the devices and the systems and processes that were going on there. And so I left there in last year in September, and I now work for the government here in ADEC, and I am a digital learning manager, and I am now able to support in digital infrastructure and governance at the government level, which is just a really interesting role for me to be able to be part of. But for me, a real passion is just working with people. And I have to do a big shout out to Mark, because one of the biggest things that got me to where I am today was the community of EdTech. And Mark was the first person that I reached out to. And he was definitely someone who was incredibly supportive of the process of this, because it isn't an easy concept. Building digital strategies is tricky. It's hard. It takes a lot of people to be able to build that and to have that structure. And so people like Mark are forever people that you need in your life.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And of course, in the midst of all of this, you've managed to write the book that is the basis of our conversation today, The Digital Ecosystem. And actually, I've just seen in the comments that Neil Statham has actually got his copy. It arrived today. So that's fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Well done. I'm a bit jealous. I've not received the actual physical copy yet, but it'll get there soon. There it is. Brilliant. Okay, you know what? I think this is a good point to kick things off a little bit and dive into a bit more detail. So, as a first question to both of you, and maybe we'll start with Philippa. What do you think schools should really consider as their cornerstone of their digital ecosystem? So really the basic structure of it, the cornerstone of it.
So I guess something that I've learned in the past 5 years of leading these strategies is really about, it's about the vision. And that's not change. Every school, generally schools have a vision of what they want to achieve from their students, what the outcome of them being part of that school and that environment is. And for me, that vision and integrating technology within that is really important. So as a main structure of the beginning of why you're using technology should be your vision. How does it fit in there, and how is it being able to enhance the vision that you've set out for your students? Because as the years go on and technology progresses, it shouldn't be a vision that needs to change. Your vision should be set, and you should be able to integrate the technology within that. And so I think it's really important for school leadership teams and governors to be able to look into that vision and kind of say, okay, so what does that mean to us? What does technology within our system mean to our school? Because it is different for every school, and not every school has the same needs. And it's silly to iterate what everyone else is doing. It's not, little boxes on the hillside. It's different concepts everywhere. So for me, that's probably the most important part of your cornerstones in terms of that. And then I think if anyone who has the book or is going to have the book, you will see there are different layers to the book, which I've scaffolded out, which is kind of, it's the vision, and then it's governance and just understanding responsibility is another really big pillar of that, of who do you go to when you need to ask questions, who is leading that vision, who is driving that vision, and who is continuing to invigor that vision to make sure that it stays relevant. And then moving on to things like safeguarding, which is important in every school, and then teaching and learning. So they're kind of the four main areas for me. And actually, if you think about them, there's nothing different there that a school shouldn't already have. And for me, that's the biggest part of digital technology, is you're not being asked to convert yourselves into a technology space. You're asking to bring the students in your communities into the world that we live in, which is integrated with technology. Everything they do, everything they see, everything around them has technological aspects. Their worlds and their jobs are going to. All we're asking people to do is say, this is where we're at, this is our vision. Okay, let's ensure that throughout that and throughout our pillars of education and having a good school, have those embedded within them as well. So that for me is the kind of 4 areas.
Yeah, and I really like your phrasing around it being integrated and not standalone, and the fact that you're basing it around, the pedagogical concepts and the pedagogical sound reasoning. I know I wrote you something, or recorded a little video not that long ago that very much talks about the similar thing, but that's kind of my experience as well in schools, is that too often technology is nearly separated and made into this separate and standalone initiative. And so then the whole thought process of initially where you're trying to introduce it or work with it to improve teaching and learning gets lost a little bit because it's so focused on the technology aspect.
And if it's not integrated within those pillars that you're focusing on in everyday school life, it gets lost because it isn't seen as important, when actually the impact of utilizing it in the right way can have a huge impact and benefit to that whole ecosystem that you're working in. So
absolutely. And I should also, at this stage, it's a good moment in time to say that we have actually got 50 books that we're giving away. And so before people, go out and buy them, rush to buy them, no problem. But we're also going to be doing a little prize draw. So 50 of you will be lucky enough to receive a book. Brilliant. So Mark, you've got this varied experience from a teacher to an administrator to a consultant to industry. You've worked with a lot of schools and individuals around this as well. It'd be really interesting to see what you have to say as well.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And I just want to reinforce the importance of what Philippa started with around vision, because in a Simon Sinek world, it's really important to start with the why are we doing it? And going and reinforcing that whole approach around integration as well. It's not just about looking at these things in isolation. How does your technology use just become de rigueur, part of the fabric of your everyday school life, from whether it's how we choose to assess, how we choose to communicate with our parents, how we choose to allow our learners to pay for their lunch. It interweaves and integrates into the whole fabric of what we do within education. So starting with your why and coming up with that vision and articulating that really, really clearly is super important. I regularly share, Wolfgang, a sort of framework which I developed after having seen the nose to T diagram back years ago about change management. And I sort of took that approach to thinking of the things that we should be considering. And so I'm just going to share a diagram with you now that sort of forms the cornerstones of the things I think schools should be considering. And what's nice about the diagram as well is that it also, on top of sort of sharing the things you should be considering, it talks about what might happen if you choose to not consider some of these things. So, if you consider all those things across the top, and I'll spend a moment explaining those briefly, but vision, Philippa's articulated that very well already, so I won't repeat that, but community is how do you engage with the wider community, from office staff to parent bodies to local community in the location that your school or college is based. The next thing to consider is the team you've got around you, because you can't do any of these things in isolation, and often school leaders actually aren't best placed to know some of the things they need to know in order to make it work in your school. So think carefully about the people you have wrapped around you. Where are your Philippas in the school who can take the mantle and run with it, given the experience that they've got? And where are your champions? And where do your students fit in? What is the student body going to do to feed into the conversation? I think involving students is super important. And obviously all these things cost money. So where's the money going to come from is what you're choosing to do sustainable. It's all very well and good buying a whole load of technology right now, but what about in 3-4 years time when you need to refresh all of that and review where you're at and what you're doing? And the next one's around the environment, and an environment doesn't necessarily mean infrastructure, like your Wi-Fi and access points and that sort of thing. It can be classrooms. Do you need to have classrooms that are set up where children can go off into corners and do work on green screening activities, or do some stop frame animation, or these sorts of things? If you forget CPD, then obviously you're already, if you've missed any of the others out, you're looking at a few issues. But if you miss out CPD, staff are going to be really anxious, and often with lots of schools you have the PD, the initial inspiration, but where's the C part of it? It's so important to reinforce that idea of making sure that what we do is continual, and it doesn't just happen in isolation. So how can you consider those sort of things, and how you're going to map that out across your school year, your terms, your weeks, your days? How does it fit into meetings, so forth and so on? And the next one is about measurement. It's so important that you actually know where you're trying to get to, what are your targets, what you're trying to achieve with it. But that can be qualitative, but some of it might just be quantitative. And so, what are those things? And benchmarking those at the beginning will help you to better reflect back and see how far you've actually come on that digital learning journey within your school. And then the final part, and obviously technology can help in lots of ways. It can reduce costs and so forth and so on. But in a Michael Fullan world where we put pedagogy first, how is it that this technology is going to actually have any impact or improvements in learning and standards within your organization, within your school? So if you take those and you remove some of them, if you don't consider learning, then you failed. If you don't measure things, how do you know if you've been successful? If you don't make sure the environment is right, then it can be frustration. If you haven't got the right team around you and you're articulating things correctly with your team, then people are confused. If you don't involve the community, you get resistance. If the vision isn't clear, then you get false starts, don't know where you're going. All these sort of things. So people often say to me, Wolfgang, what is the Mark Anderson sort of plan for getting all this stuff working? But the thing is, I can provide prompts for consideration, but like Philippa has alluded to, and things you've said as well, Wolfgang, every school is different, every context is different. Every school's improvement plan, development plan, community is all different. Just like no two children are the same, no two classes are ever the same. It's all different. So having these kind of signposts to inform your reflective thinking about where you're at on that journey, I've always found a really great starting point for conversations with school leaders and those seeking to embed digital and have a strong digital strategy in their school, so that you can have a thinking and then frame it within the context of your own organization.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm going to actually, I'll pick up a question instead of responding myself, because Richard Brewster has asked a really good question to you guys about, and it's something that I've also quite often struggled with, is how do you measure the success? It's a really difficult one, and it's something that 17 years ago when I first started an international school, we rolled out a one-to-one laptop program. It was the front-running schools that did this. It wasn't so much about how do we measure this, it was just the glamour. And then it became everybody has to have this, right? We have to be in one-to-one schools, we have to have technology. But yeah, so how does one measure improvements in medium or short to medium terms, and also what kind of evidence do you suggest for schools to be collecting and producing? Maybe Philippa.
Thanks. So I recently did my MPQSL and actually focused really in on that, because it was although utilizing data, we do that all the time in schools. Well, lots of people do, not everybody does, but it's kind of one of those things that we look at. And so actually one of the things that I drilled down into was those mid-level students who tend to be missed, and actually how can we make sure that they're improving? And actually what I worked with was a team of staff, and tried to get them to look at that data and think about what they were doing in their classroom every single day. And it was based upon their Cat4 data, and it was based on the testing, the GL assessments at the beginning of the year. And then it was measured by the end progress of that. And what we were looking at realistically was where is it standardizing our students and where are we putting them? Because if you look at it in a balance, the previous year, the students were making the same progress. So if I was in the old system, a level 4 or something, so if I were in the new system, if I was level 4, I'd continue just to be a level 4, just going up and up and up, because I was doing what I should be doing, okay? The higher achievers would be going up from 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, and the lower ones would be going up 3, 3, 3 or 2, 2, 2. And no one really makes any fluctuation between those bands because they just think, well, they're doing okay. But actually, should that child be doing okay, or should they be better than that? Or actually, is that child exceeding? And that's incredible. And so whatever we're doing in the classroom is really working for them. So sometimes drilling down within that data from the standardized assessments can be really helpful. And how can digital technology within the classroom, like retrieval practice, utilizing digital summative and formative assessments that are continual throughout the formative assessments continually throughout the term, the project. Can we start to utilize technology to draw out and start to think about the cognitive load and the development of the students? And so we looked at a project for that, and actually it wasn't a huge amount of progress, but it was 0.6% on average per student was making, because we were looking at each individual student. And if you are a class teacher and you have 30 students in front of you, if you're looking at certain data points, it makes it a lot easier as long as you're continually monitoring that. And so one part of Richard's question would be, for me, is getting staff to focus in on something very specific, but having constant conversations about it. Because I think if people they can start the project, but if they're not being questioned or being asked to consider it frequently enough, they can lose track of what they're meant to be looking for and looking at. And one of the things that I find the most incredible about digital technology is that straight after I've taught a lesson or the next lesson, I can see if students have understood or if they have misconceptions. And directly from that, I can identify that and go back, or I can continue, or I can target. And so actually utilizing some data from that allows us to make some really short-term evidential kind of improvements within it. And on the flip side of that is, when you've actually also done your digital strategy, when it's embedded in things, one of the things that I find the most interesting is actually speaking to your students. And Mark was talking about that earlier, about your community, your wider community. What is it actually the effect had on them? And interestingly, we did a learning walk last term with my previous school, where, to the shock of many, we were not actually looking at the teachers. We were asking the students. We were walking around and we were saying to students, what did you do today and how did you do it? And who told you that you could do it, in X way? And most of the time they were saying, well, we had the choice. We were able now to facilitate our own learning, be independent within that, and that's brilliant. But actually, we also were able then to find that not only were we finding that it was embedded within lessons and in lots of different lessons in different ways, but some of the things that people find the hardest to teach, and from my perspective in my 12 years, which is, I'm sure, very limited in terms of lots of other people, but research tools and the ability to research well, I find is always something that's kind of either very glazed over or isn't done very well. And we found that in 4 subjects, students were finding that the research element of their projects was by far the most interesting part because of the use of technology. And actually, so it's things like that. So it's not necessarily data driven, but it's opinions. And actually, the opinions of our students are really important. And just like utilizing formative assessment continually, you start to allow students to have ownership and be aware more and take that kind of governance of their own learning into what they're doing. Okay, I got that, and I know I'm going to have another test next week, and I need to be listening more, I need to be focused, or I need to do this, or I can do this. And having that mindset where we're openly talking about things that go wrong, things that go right, and data and where we can improve is really one of the biggest things that we can measure within the schools, is actually that we have that power, we have that information in our hands.
I think that's a really good point. And I my previous role before joining i3 was heavily involved in data and really changing also that mindset from being data driven to being data informed. And so you get actually the information. And so one of the things we started doing is, it's a well-known fact that students know what good learning looks like, but it's very difficult to articulate that. So we set up a system where actually we try to elaborate on that particular concept. So whenever a student or a teacher for that matter felt like there was a good teaching moment, they had a very quick technology tool to just note it down. And we got it centralized, it was all collected. And so because we really wanted to focus on, it's a very difficult measure to say what is good learning and what does it look like, but you feel it in the moment. So if you enable students and teachers to have the ability in that moment to feed back and write it down and document it in a very quick, easy fashion, then I think that's also something that can really help you. Thank you, Philippa. I think, but a lot of what you say actually leads into the next question that I was going to ask anyway. And so, Mark, you can probably tie in a little bit, sort of the question from Richard into what then should the pillars of an actual sound digital strategy look like?
Yeah, thank you, Wolfgang. And I mean, it does tie in quite nicely because, again, going back to the sort of responses from the first question, it is again contextual. So, you know, if you've worked out what your strategy should look like and what you want to include in there, it might tie into, you know, whole school development priorities. It could be around an overarching sort of vision where you're talking about things such as, you know, reducing teacher workload or improving parental engagement, or it could be all sorts of things. So jumping into Richard's question directly, which was asking about how just trying to find it in the list again now. Seems to have disappeared now, the question. Where's it gone? You talk about measuring impact in the sort of short, medium, and long term. Let's take cashless catering as an example. If you're embedding cashless catering, then one of the things you want to try and do is probably reduce contact, probably improve efficiency in a dinner hall, make the lunch queue shorter, time for children to get their lunches quicker, all these kinds of things. So, you know, based upon the choices you've made around the things you're including in your actual approach, would be the thing you could then measure. So you can do comparative studies based on where you were before you had cashless catering and where you are now when it's embedded, and so forth and so on. And you can apply that thinking to anything that you want. So I was talking with Laura Knight recently. She's head of digital strategy and digital implementation at Berkhamsted School here in the UK, and they have a think tank that meets regularly every half term, and they go away and do little research projects. And one of the things they were looking at was how can we reduce teacher workload by 1 hour a week through the use of technology. And so they came up with a whole lot of strategies for doing that, and then rolled out training around it. And the idea was that teachers would get back an hour of their time across the week. Well, again, if you're taking those sorts of approaches and thinking about that in the context within your school, then you've got a benchmark upon which you can then measure that against, like I was showing about the measurement part in the diagram before. Thinking carefully about the pillars that would sort of form things in your for your digital strategy. Again, it goes to your priorities. You'll have considered those things like Philippa and I shared on question 1, but then you go down and often it sort of come from your vision. So is it, you know, a focus around staff well-being? Is it an issue or a thing around embedding or improving creativity within the school? You know, I say every school is different, but when you have those provocations like we were discussing in question 1, they then inform what the pillars may well be. So common things are often around teacher skills, student skills, making them future ready, thinking around safeguarding and digital citizenship and all these different things. But again, you know, we can say all these things, but what I say or Philippa might say are great based upon the context upon which we've worked in before, but it's down to you to work out from your thinking and reflections what the pillars should be within your context.
Yeah.
Do you want to add anything onto that, Philippa?
Yeah, I feel like Wolfgang's talking, but we can't hear him, so he might be muted. Sorry. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Oh, and I think you're right in terms of whenever I've started digital strategy, just going back to that question as well, is looking at how people feel and where they, and then be able to say to them, you know what, 6 months ago, this is where you were, and now you're here, and this is how much progression we have made as a school, as a community, as a group of teachers, and that's really important. And that leads into that pillars, exactly as you said. And I mean, some of the things that kind of my concept around that would really link into what you've just been saying. It's what drives you in pedagogy as a school. Do you have a high number of additional language speakers? Do you have a high number of students who have disabilities? Do you have a high number of your community who are potentially even, you know, refugees, people from different countries? What is your community? Just that is what bases around your pedagogy and what drives your vision for your school, to make sure that those students have every opportunity to continue to succeed. And so that for me is a huge pillar. But again, it's so different depending on your own school and your area and your community, that it's difficult to be more specific than to say pedagogy. It should be driven by what you need to be focusing on. And, you know, having worked on school improvement plans and things like that, it's always, there's always a driver within the school. There's always something that we need to improve. And I think those pillars need to be set out for digital technology and learning within that school improvement plan, and linked directly to those specific concepts that you're already trying to improve. So for instance, you know, a massive concept when I first started teaching was boys. Year 9 boys in subjects were not doing as well, surprisingly, as year 9 girls, and why? And so you were continually trying to engage them further. So there's lots of different levels within that need to be addressed. And bringing in that community for me is really important. I think digital technology, there's this huge divide. There's a big gap within that. There are our students and there are us, and there's this huge dip where we all went to school and didn't have technology, and we just don't know what learning looks like. And actually, for me, that link in terms of the pillars is actually building and bringing in that community. So a huge part of what I've tried to do in schools is bring in those communities and try and say, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. And even to the extent of upskilling parents of, you know, it's not about trying to spoon feed people. It's about just making them aware of what's being done, what's happening, and how they can support their child, because we've become digitally savvy adults within our working environments, but we need to also remember that our children are digitally savvy within their learning environment as a child. And what does that mean? Because it's different. It's totally different to what we experienced as children growing up. And so that divide specifically is important for me as a pillar in terms of everybody's school at the moment. And, you know, in 10, 15 years time, that will be different, because those children will have children and it will be normal. And the innovation that's flooding through schools will be different for them, but it'll also be this, what we're doing now will just be normal. It will be in every day, and it will be even further along than it already is. And if you don't mind, so Neil has said something about future of technology and the biggest
exactly.
impact. And actually, for me, that, because unfortunately at the moment, the situation that we are across the world, that we have this digital divide and we have digital inequality, a lot of people's future of educational technology will be coming to the place where a lot of other schools are around the world. These leaders in technology, these, you know, EdTech 50s, these Apple distinguished, Microsoft schools, Google, environments. We will be bringing them up to there, and for them, that will be a huge impact globally, is to actually be able to bring everybody to that same level. And then it's really hard to say what's next, because things are changing so quickly. And I think one of the other pillars that this links into, which is what I was wanting to say, is because it's about that innovation. It's about people who are driving this vision being continually on top and having the ability and the kind of the power within their school to make those decisions about the change that's necessary. Because if we look at how long it's taken us to understand that educational technology has a place in schools and is useful and can be conducive to the education system, if we're then going to introduce something new to these schools, in addition to that, we need to be working on that now. What does that look like? How are we preparing our staff who potentially are feeling the impacts of having to work online, are being disengaged by technology, not wanting to integrate it? How do we take them to the next level? And actually, a lot of work needs to go into that now, and into professional development of this isn't the end. We've upskilled you to where we were hoping you might be 10 years ago. And now we need to continue, and we need to keep going up that curve. Otherwise, we're going to drop, and you're going to have to climb that steep mountain again. And that's where it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's really important to also for schools to sort of set their standards of where they want to be on all fronts, right? Not just digital technology, but making sure that with, as Mark said, with this continued professional development, that you really build a culture of wanting to learn and needing to learn. Both of those go hand in hand, and there should be some excitement about that too. There should be some want and drive to be involved in personally developing, but also helping to develop those around you, whether they be colleagues or students. So I think, yeah, that's really nicely tied us into what I wanted to talk about next, which is a little bit more granular and specific about the types of technology that schools should be considering. And of course, I'd be amiss a little bit for not sharing with you where we think we fit into all of that. And as i3 Technology, we have our own thing that we consider the ecosystem. And so it would be very good for you guys to maybe just have a brief look at where we think we stand with that and not be so product focused. So our main drive is really developing our products with teachers and for teachers in mind, to really recognize that first and foremost, no two schools are the same. And I think that's our biggest underlying drive as a company, is to appreciate and understand the necessity to treat schools just like we do as educator students, treat schools as individual organizations that have a requirement and a need to really listen to where they are in their journey, and not just focus on a specific hole filler or gap filler or a plaster to address one single thing. So to that end, really, we're trying to make sure that from the ground up, our displays and our accessories allow for like a seamless integration to things that already exist and co-live hence the word ecosystem, so that we don't become the standalone headache to schools and educators, but we actually are genuinely interested in helping professionally develop and continuously professional develop teachers, so that teaching and learning really does improve. And looking at something like the SAMR model, I know we've talked about this a lot, Mark, recently, and how to use that. That all has to play into TPAC, and so on. That it all has to play into companies like us when we talk about an educational ecosystem. So maybe just briefly from your guys' end, how do you feel about very granular, specific examples of the types of technologies schools should or could be considering? Maybe we'll start with Mark.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's, again, it all goes to your context, but what technologies are going to provide value given the setting that you're in. So Philippa quite rightly mentioned about diversity within schools, children from different backgrounds, English as an additional language, for example, students from more deprived backgrounds, so forth and so on. So again, it's really important to consider your context, but it's also important to consider your phase, So if we're talking about some i3 products, for example, imoLearn, fantastic product for active learning. We'll be talking about that and as a topic, active learning in our next session. But that would not be an appropriate product for a sixth form college. It might be interesting to see some children using a device like that, but it's not really relevant. However, you flipping it around, thinking about future technologies around VR, again, maybe not really that appropriate for learners age 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you're working with older students, technology is fantastic because it gives us the opportunity to do things that wouldn't be possible without that technology. So if we're thinking about that sort of a world, the simulations and activities that learners can engage with through virtual reality are fantastic. And if you can find a compelling case, one of the issues, Wolfgang, with technology is when sometimes schools buy it, they're wowed by the cool things that it can do, but it's not being purchased in a way which actually is being done to solve a problem. Knowing your school well, knowing what the issues your school is facing, and then looking for technology to provide solutions to those problems is a much better way of going than going, oh, that's cool, we could try and use it. And then, you know, it's like trying to put that, it's that adage, isn't it, about trying to put a round peg in a square hole. That they're never really going to fit quite right. And I often share about technology that's gimmicky as well, because whilst I'm, you know, you both know me well, you know, I'm probably one of the geekiest people you'll know, but just because you love technology doesn't mean to say that you should necessarily use it. And so, you know, having some the pillars we talked about before that you'll come up with, they'll end up forming and being your North Stars. And so when you're thinking about technology you might want to invest in the future, look to your pillars. You know, do these technologies meet the things we're trying to achieve as a school as part of our digital strategy with these pillars we're trying to hang things off? So I mentioned well-being as an issue before. So if well-being is a priority for you and one of your pillars, then what products can you get in place to support both your teaching community, your student community, your wider community around their well-being? And so, yeah, that's always my sort of approach. Always, Moore's law means that technology is always going to improve, get faster, and become, you know, more interesting, and so forth and so on. But it's about being guided by our sort of our not necessarily moral compass, but certainly the compass that our pillars in our digital strategy give us that will help us make the right decisions, I think.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I'm just reading the comment by Neil as well, if we can just bring that up. And he says, how far should or could the ecosystem concept actually reach into teacher training? And I think that's a part where, you know, schools have always used universities as the reason to potentially do or not do something. It's about time where we flip that a little bit and say, as schools, we're really, you know, we are still the ones on the ground. We are the ones that have to prepare the students for their future, whatever that may be or hold. And so we need teachers really to be, as you've just described, they need to be adaptable. And I think, you know, technology for a long time now has been in education, and of course should be in education. Not that it always has to be technology that's the best method, but for sure we have to look at teacher colleges and training facilities and CPD institutions to really put some pressure on them to help with this, with the whole journey, and make sure that we get teachers in the future that aren't panicking anymore, that aren't as fearful and scared of, you know, doing something wrong. I mean, that's the one thing I learned very on in my teaching career. I'm wrong about most things all the time, and so it's much easier to make mistakes because I just put my hand up and say, you know, at least I'm trying. And that usually comes across quite well with students because they see that we're humans and we're trying to do our best too. And that becomes then much more of a joint learning journey. Philippa, I think, sorry, I'm
mindful of time, but I just want to sort of circle back on that a second, because I think Neil's question about, you know, should it be embedded within sort of initial teacher training and things like that, it goes back to what we were sharing before, Wolfgang and Philippa, about TPAC and SAMRA model and all these sort of things, because it's not about using technology all the time. My favorite part of the TPAC model is it's about when it's right to or not to. And so what we need is educators who, just like they're well informed around and need you know, continued professional development around the latest thinking around teaching and learning, so they need the same sort of thing so they can make informed choices about what they do with technology in the classroom as well. So if you take questioning as an example, you'll know when to do, like, you know, Harkness or cold calling or whatever, based upon the scenario you're in the classroom with your children. So in an ideal world, your teaching colleagues will have the same kind of knowledge level and skill to better know when it's right to use Google Forms or to use an AR tool or quizzes or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so true. And I have to say, one of the things that I remember, we did an Apple, we had an Apple tour at the first school that I was here in the UAE. And I remember being really worried and panicky about that whole concept of it had to be, you know, technology driven and everyone had to be doing something and all that kind of stuff. And it was my first few months there. And I remember the head of Apple Education here said to me, if you took those devices out of that class, would the learning still happen? And I was like, well, yeah. And she was like, that's it. Technology shouldn't be the driving force. Technology should be an enhancer. And she said, if I walked into a classroom and knew that the only way those children are learning is because of those devices, you failed, because I don't think she used the word failed, but you know, you've got it wrong, because that's not the point. The point of technology is to show that it can be done in a different way, and is to show that there are other alternatives and that we can integrate it in a different way. it's not that it's necessarily always the better way, but the most important thing about schools is that if it was taken away, can they still learn? If the answer is yes, then amazing. And from my perspective,
just to jump in really quickly, I think that's a really strong point, is that we have to be so mindful of the fact that technology is a tool and it's a means to an end that isn't necessarily always the best choice. I mean, we've touched upon this a couple of times, but really that, I mean, it's only as good as the usage of it. It doesn't by itself make teaching and learning better. And ultimately, what's still most important, and we've learned this more so over the last 20 months than ever before, is that teacher-student relationship and the physicality is probably irreplaceable. Not in its entirety, but certainly to a large part in education. We will remain in schools and brick and mortar buildings, I think, for a lot of it. Because that's needed. The relationships are needed, and that's nothing to do with technology.
The way that grows, though, is through the leadership making sure exactly what you were saying earlier, Wolfgang, is that mistakes are allowed to be made, and it doesn't always work. My key thing was, can whatever you're doing work offline? Have you got an alternative offline? Things like that, and it's about being able to create those cultures for things to not go the right way. Fantastic.
So I've got time is running when you're having fun, isn't it? It's like flying. Something that I do want to touch upon, and we've talked about, that's really important, especially at this moment in time, and with a lot of things having moved digitally, is the whole safeguarding aspect. And I do want to give you a moment, Mark, to talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of schools struggle with that, and that's something they do need help with. And so a bit of advice and insight from you would be great on that point.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Thank you for that opportunity, Wolfgang. Safeguarding I used to work with a teacher called David Didang. Quite a lot of you may know of him from his various books that he's written and the sharing that he does. But David is an English teacher, and as an English teacher, you think that it's his job just to teach English, but it's all of our jobs to teach English in English-speaking schools. We, even though my subject was business and economics and computing, I would still mark grammar errors. I would still mark spelling mistakes and so forth and so on. So we're all teachers of English, and in actual fact, we've all got a responsibility to around safeguarding. But the issue is making sure that you've got the structures, like lots of things we're sharing on today. It's important we've got the right structures in place in order to facilitate that. So, speaking about schools here in England, we'll have a designated safeguarding lead, somebody probably normally on leadership who has an oversight on these sorts of things. But it's difficult to. It's one thing having processes in place to deal with things, in real life. But what can we have in place in school to help us deal with things when students are in their digital life? And so making sure that you have some tools in place to help with that, it will be really useful. So there's a great company here in the UK called the Safeguarding Company, who provides safeguarding software for DSLs and for others in the school to actually make use of. With my net support hat on for a second, we've got software which has contextual intelligence built into it, because it tracks and monitors all the words, all the things that children type in onto the devices in the school. So it tracks those, and then if a keyword is triggered from a huge bank, multilingual bank of keywords, then it creates a trigger, and the safeguarding leads within the school can investigate that further. Screenshots are taken. It has integrations with safeguarding record keeping software like you can get from a safeguarding company. So it's just important to make sure that, just like you would expect all teaching staff to be reminded annually about what to do if a child discloses, and following that same sort of TED sort of process when children disclose to you, all those sort of things. It's equally important that teachers know what to do if they're worrying about online issues, and of which there can be so many, from grooming to radicalization to just general bullying, sexting, all these things. the beauty of it is tools like our Net Support DNA or Classroom Cloud with safeguarding built in, or even a tool Philippa and I know really well called Go Bubble, which can keep an eye on all those different things as well with the AI behind the scenes. It's using the technology to leverage it in such a way that it means that you can provide a nice wrapper of care for your learners without it being intrusive, obtrusive, and stopping them from being able to engage and enjoy their activities just as they would want to anyway. So that's my general advice. Get some software in. That there are lots to choose from. I mentioned a few there, but others are available, obviously. Tie that directly into your ecosystem as well, because just like you'll have student well-being and safeguarding as part of your IRL offer with your learners, so it's important that you have that measurement and checking, balance checking, taking place in the digital sense as well. I think
he's on mute again. I'm going to take that opportunity to add something.
Yes.
If I can just add as well, and I think one of the things for me that I've found is that teachers fear the online world because they don't necessarily understand all of these different things, and so actually being able to support your teachers with training them on how to identify, and also when students come to you and talk to you about things, that you can potentially understand what they're talking about. So digital online safeguarding training is incredibly important these days to your students. Whether you have devices in school or not, it is something that every teacher should be being trained in as a standard part of the unrolling the academic annual training sessions, because it changes so quickly. But we also have such a lack of knowledge about what is really happening. And actually our children are in those different zones. They're talking to people online, they're doing all those things. And we need to be able to, as pastoral caregivers, to be able to identify when there are issues like that happening.
Yeah, and I think, Philippa, I think you're touching upon this already, and Mark mentioned it with the leadership role that a safeguard usually has. You talk in your book a lot about digital governance and so on, and I think this would be a perfect point, maybe being a little bit mindful of our last 9 minutes, maybe in 4 minutes or so, if you could just share with the audience what is digital governance and why is it so important?
Yeah, so I think, we have governance across all different sectors, not just, obviously companies have governance across everything. And actually most companies in industry, not education, have a CTO, someone in charge of their technology. And actually digital governance is about building in those different structures and identifying people who are there to be accountable. Not necessarily in a negative way, but somebody who is there to be able to ensure that things are happening, that there is rigor, that there are policies in place, that and part of my book talks about the link, and actually Neil, who's on the chat, will know as well, because he's a PE teacher by trade but is a digital technology lead. It's that understanding that your governance for your digital strategy is not developed and designed by your IT team who teach information technology or computer science. It's developed by somebody who is looking at it across a pedagogical and academic approach and pastoral approach. And then what you need is this links between the people within your school structure. So your governors are on the same vision. They understand what you're trying to achieve from integrating technology, and they're on board with that, and they're going to be able to put in the funding and the continuity, as Mark was talking about earlier, with your operational costs and your capacity costs, to make sure that it can continue to be driven. But then on top of that, at the top of that structure, and from my perspective, this should be somebody that sits with your leadership team. It's, you have your academic, you have your pastoral, you have your digital technology leader, because those are all big infrastructure elements that go towards the driving of the everyday of your school. And as part of that, there are policies that need to be in place to make sure that everybody is safe, to make sure that things run properly, to make sure you have that liaison, this is what I was talking about, Neil, with your best friend. So as a digital leader, your best friend is the IT guy. He's the person who understands everything that happens in terms of the hardware and helping out, and whether X, Y, and Z will connect. And, when you come to them with these crazy ideas, yes, that will work, or no, it won't, or give me 5 minutes and I'll have a look. They're the people with the knowledge about how the infrastructure will work and maintaining that infrastructure. And your digital leader is the person who looks at it with a pedagogical eye and says, what can we do to enhance learning here? What can we do to improve student outcomes? What can we do to better our school? Now, governance just outlines these different roles and responsibilities, and it equally highlights the roles of the teachers. It highlights what they should be doing with that technology. So we've given you this technology, you asked for this, it was going to make your life easier, let's do the training. And the training is going to happen this many times. And we've asked you for your opinion because we want to know, because we want to help you in your classroom. So please respond to the surveys and things that we're doing, because they're all going to filter back. And on top of that, there's the importance that if you request information, that you give it back. And the governance is all part of this creation of this ecosystem of what works best for the people on the ground, for the children every day, for the communities you work in. And who at the top is going to have your back? Because there needs to be people who've got our backs to make sure this happens. And so that whole structure of governance becomes not only policy making, not only infrastructure and hardware, but it becomes the strategy as a whole. Who looks after it, who maintains it, who curates it. And
I think also, like, something that you've just mentioned, I think that building of culture of really eliciting feedback and making sure that, like you said, I think a lot of times collecting feedback but then not doing anything about it, or not feeding back the results of the feedback, that's often a waste of time, isn't it?
Absolutely. And equally, people will say, why did you ask me if you didn't want to know? And, you already knew what you were going to do. When I think actually gaining that feedback, and it goes back to a question right at the beginning, was how can you look at how you can monitor progress that has been happening. We can look at that even in individual steps of governance of did that make things easier? Did that make it better? Has that program and platform of having a digital portfolio or having more communication methods or using the app, did it help? And if not, why didn't it, and can we change that? And I think there's that constant iteration of looking at things and going, is this right for us? Or is it just that flashy thing that we saw that everyone else is using and it's not our tool?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, go on, Mark.
Just to reinforce Philippa's point there, I think it's so important that school leaders are really honest about these things as well and go on that journey with you, because I think that's beneficial on two levels. On one level, it gives any kind of strategy legitimacy. So many schools will have a passionate person trying to drive things forward, but without the clear and transparent support from senior leadership, any of those kind of initiatives are highly likely to be ones which will fail. And the other part of that as well is being an honest leader, recognizing that and sharing that you need training yourself. I don't know how to do this in Word or how to do this in PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever it is, and articulating that and asking for help yourself, not trying to sit in an ivory tower as a school leader, pretending like you know everything. Actually articulating that to colleagues across the school, saying I'm on this journey too. I'm learning new things. It's helping me with my life and my work and what I do as well. Having that sort of transparency at a leadership level, I think is so important, because if you can't be transparent and honest about that, then that again hits the relationships that are so important to making all these things work as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, really, really good. And I think at this point of our discussion panel, I really actually want to also just say that it's exactly what I was hoping for. Of course, we prepare for these things, but I think a lot of conversation and comments and reflectiveness comes whilst actually talking and listening to each other. And just at this point where we're coming towards the end, I really want to say thank you, because I hope I'm getting a few comments as well from the audience, but I think it's been a very useful hour to listen to and get some advice. And there's much more looking at the QR code up on top of my head, being able to win your book or buy your book. Because I think that's where we need to start as well. We need to also realize that we need to continuously educate ourselves with people who are researching, publishing things. Mark publishes a lot of things. There's plenty of people that publish really worthwhile material, books, information, infographics, all kinds of things, some for free, some not for free. But I think that's a really important aspect as well. So before I finish off, the one thing we really wanted to do is bring some technology to this and actually have a virtual spinning wheel to at least announce 3 lucky winners. and we've got Caitlin, our own Caitlin, has been practicing digitally spinning for months, or at least hours. So we've got a few names up there of people who've registered, and we're just going to go for it. Let's go for the first winner.
Right.
Look at this, so exciting. Who do we have?
All right. Our first winner is Johan from the Show Group in again.
All right.
Next one.
Is it Johan again?
Nope. It's Nancy from the Basel Show and no.
Excellent.
One.
Mark Anderson.
Yeah, imagine we're in there.
And we have James from members.
Fantastic. James, Nancy, and Johan, well done. 3 lucky winners, and there'll be 47 more to go that we'll do in our own time, but you shall be informed of such. Just to finish off, Mark already mentioned it, so and I did at the beginning, we've got 5 more shows coming up over the next few months. The next one will be January 13th, and that's all about active learning. Mark mentioned our IMO Learn, which will actually be giving away a whole set of the physical the physical IMOs as well as the digital add-ons for them. And I just think bringing on John Smedley will be fantastic, and Annika, who's our in-house educational consultant and expert at all things of how it looks in the classroom. I think it'll be another really interesting discussion with people who deeply care about the education sector. For logistics, if you've signed up and not opted out of information, you will automatically get the sign-up links and information from us. But otherwise, please do sign up with a QR code up on the image there. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much, Philippa and Mark, for joining me in this wonderful hour. I've learned a lot, certainly, and I'm excited to have met you, Philippa, for the first time virtually.
Yeah, you also.
So thank you very, very much, and have a fantastic evening, both of you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for everyone to watch.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good evening. Bye-bye.